Welcome to the Peaked podcast, where I talk about gender identity ideology and other bad ideas, women's rights and free speech from a European point of view. Annette Pacey, thanks very much for coming to tell me about your experiences in the StrasBorg. How are you doing?
I'm well, thanks for having me.
Can I say Annette Pacey, actually? Sorry.
Yeah.
I think it's funny. You say Pace and I say Pace because I thought the Council of Europe's PACE, Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. I thought it was supposed to be like the Italian word for peace because they call themselves like a peace fucking council or whatever. But you say Pace.
Oh, I don't know. So maybe you're right. That
I
would
would
make
rather
sense.
if they...
Yes, I just said pace. It's like...
Because, did you hear someone saying that? Or...
Well, my surname is Pacey, so that's the first four letters. I just pronounced it the same way, like the English way.
Okay, yeah, right. You're used to that sound. I don't know. Nobody talked about it because nobody knows how it's pronounced because nobody talks about it because nobody knows it exists.
No, I don't think anybody really does know that it exists. It's the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, which is, maybe we should start there and explain what it even is, because there was a lot of confusion about, especially, I think a lot of people, and especially in the UK, get confused about even the difference between the EU and the Council of Europe. And when they hear about a parliamentary assembly, they're kind of in their mind thinking, oh, it's the European Parliament. But of course, this is something completely different. In the Council of Europe, for a start, it's 46 countries, not the 27 countries of the EU. So all the little countries are in there, Bosnia, Herzegovina and Moldova and all countries. And the other main difference is that the MPs that sit in the PACE or the PACE are sitting MPs in their own countries. So they're not directly elected to this assembly. They are MPs that have their own jobs in their own countries and their own parliaments. And so a few times a year, they come to StrasBorg and they sit in the PACE and vote on various resolutions.
Do you have a nice and neat little explainer of what the Council of Europe is for? I only know what the propaganda, which is like peace on earth. Do you know any more than that?
My understanding is that it's mostly about human rights and the things they seem to, don't have a neat little summary, but yeah, it seems to be more human rights stuff. There was, I was there were things going through obviously about Ukraine and, this kind of thing, more than the EU being more of a sort of, it's more comprehensive, isn't it? But also more focused on trade, although obviously they do plenty of human rights and social stuff as well.
Plenty of mission creep going on there. Right. And so let's begin the beginning. You said you were there, and that's why I wanted to talk to you today, because you went inside the Borg. And I think when I heard that Asena were going to be present in the Council of Europe, I was really happy because I can't picture it. I know what the building looks like. I've been in StrasBorg. Oh, hold on. Actually, do you know what? I'm telling a total lie. I've actually been in it. I've been in the building years ago for some other thing. It's very old and weird 60s building. Am I right? Is that it?
From the outside, it looks like this quite ugly, big 60s block. And when you get inside, it's got this really cool kind of fountain-shaped central bit. And it's actually quite nice inside. But from the outside, yeah, it looks...
Well, if I was in a room that looked like it was a spaceship from it was like 2001 Space Odyssey, weird vibe off it. That's all I can remember. Maybe it was a different part of it. Or maybe, no, it was definitely the Council of Europe. Anyway, I wanted to be able to picture a little bit better where all of these bizarre laws come from. And as we know, Council of Europe was before the Commission or the EU Parliament in any of this gender stuff. And I was like, I hope Athena come out with lots of images about what it looks like so that people can, because it's all a big black pit, all of it. The Commission, the EU, the Parliament, the Council, the European Council of the EU. There's all these things and acronyms, and nobody really, I know Brussels really well, and I still cannot imagine what it is I'm talking about when I say today the European Parliament voted on a resolution to call trans women or women in the UN Commission for the Status of Women. So I was like, I hope Athena come out with some images. And you did post some images, but I'm hoping that today you can describe it so that we get a real vivid picture. So I don't know how creative you're going to be with this, but I need a real vivid picture of where this is coming from. And maybe we could start by you explaining how and why you ended up there in the first place and what it was for specifically on the day that you went there.
Well, it was a great surprise to me to end up there. I hadn't expected this to happen until right before it did. But for those that don't know, Athena Forum launched in November, late October, November last year, 2025. So what happened was in December last year, right after Athena Forum launched, the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination, which is part of the PACE, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, they adopted a draft resolution that was calling for a Europe-wide ban on conversion practices. The rapporteur for that was a British MP called Kate Osborne. So she's a British Labour MP. And she had been working on that in that committee for a couple of years. And I think the motivation for her and for a few other, British Labour MPs that are in the PACE is because it's officially part of the Labour manifesto. It's something that they want to pass in the UK, and obviously the UK has been tied up with some other stuff, so that hasn't actually happened, but they want to bring pressure. And this is, as you know, what activists can do with the Council of Europe. It's why it's a very useful forum for them. They can spend time developing these trans activist wish lists in the form of a resolution with very little scrutiny, because as you just said, nobody pays attention to what happens in the Council of Europe. It's very difficult to get any media interested in it. And they can get these things through in the Council of Europe, and then they can take them back to their home country, in this case, the UK. And then they can say, well, look, this is a European consensus. This is a kind of human rights standard. It's something that's coming from the Council of Europe. And that it carries weight when they're trying to get things done in their own parliaments in their own home country. In this case, it's the UK, but of course this will also be used, across Europe by any activists that want this kind of thing, because conversion therapy bans, part of sort of three main pillars of what's holding up this gender identity sort of push throughout the European institutions, along with self-ID and hate speech laws. So these are the kind of three areas that are,
these are the three advocacy goals. These are the movement advocacy focus at the moment.
And so conversion therapy bans are like a really important part of that. And so that's why you see them coming up all over the place in Europe. And it was hard for us with the campaign that we tried to do, the challenges were to get people to understand what the Council of Europe even was, why this even mattered, and importantly, that the UK is part of it. And not only in this case, the UK is not only part of it, but it was a British MP who was bringing it. So when we first did our, campaign and we talk about it on social media, we would get comments like from people in the UK saying, oh, well, thank God that's nothing to do with us. We left. It's like, no, you're very much still part of the Council of Europe.
Just to get this straight, so Kate Osborne is a Labour MP. She's in the UK, but she's also been told, right, you're also part of the Labour delegation or the British government delegation to Strasbourg every time they have one of these parliamentary meetings. So you go over there and you make us proud and you propose some bills, and we need support for this conversion therapy bill that we're already planning to do. So we need you to go over to Strasbourg, get it passed, and then come back and say, oh, look, the international standards that have been developed in Strasbourg, these are telling us that we must introduce this conversion therapy ban. That's how I understand it. And if I understand it, not knowing how the sausage is made is kind of part of it. Like we never really knew that that's sort of what was going on, that if any country's government wanted a certain thing, they could farm their MPs out to different international bodies and then come home and say, oh, look what the international standards are telling us to do, when in fact they can orchestrate the whole thing, essentially. The whole, and I mean the creation of the international standards.
Yeah, I think that's the way that this kind of activism works actually across all kinds of topics, not just gender, but yeah, it certainly works that way with the gender identity stuff. So yeah, each country of the 46 countries has a national delegation that goes to Strasbourg to the PACE. And then within that, each national delegation also that's made up of different parties from that country. So it's not just the ruling party, whoever happens to be in power in whichever country at the moment. And then that national delegation at the PACE gets split up into its different political groups. So there are the socialists, there are the UEL, who are the very far left ones. There's the ALDE, which are kind of like Liberal Democrats. There's the EPP, which is the sort of centre-right People's Party. And then there's the ECPA. And these are the political groups within the PACE. And then the national delegations, they come with a sort of delegation size that's proportional to their size as a country. Somehow that's worked out. And then those MPs all sort of split into their various groups. Okay. And that's how it works. And so, yeah, I think activists do find it a very useful forum to get things passed that they can then use to bring pressure wherever they want to in other places. And something that really helps them with that is that nobody pays attention. It's very, very, very hard to get any press coverage. That was a huge challenge for us when I was there, to get any press interested in it, because it is obscure, you know? And like, I guess they don't think they're going to get very many clicks on it. And so they're just not really that interested in publishing some resolution that's going through a parliament that most people have never really heard of.
Yeah, it's difficult to make a splash with it. So I guess Kate Osborne is over there. She's sectioned herself off into the far right, or sorry, the left wing party, which is what in the council.
She's not even in the far left one. She's in the main socialist, which is the main left wing party. Then there's the UEL that are sort of more the kind of Greens and right, you know, the more even sort of very, very left ones. But so what happens is they make a proposal for a resolution at some point 2 years ago. And
Annette, what's a resolution? Like, we talk about resolutions all the time. I don't even know what it is. Like, do you know?
Well, it's a document that calls for something. In this case, it calls for a ban on conversion practices. And my understanding is that at some point, somebody makes a speech in the parliament and says, this thing is needed. And then that gets sent to a committee. And then in the committee, they develop the document which lays out what they think should happen, the reasons they think it. You can see the whole document there. And then that gets worked on and voted on through the committee over a couple of years. And then eventually it passes the committee. And then it goes to the main plenary and it gets debated and voted on there. And if it passes, then it's adopted as an official text. And so that process has been going on long before Athena formed. Right after we formed it, at the beginning of the December, is when it passed through committee and we found out that it was going to go to the plenary. So that's when we started to plan a campaign. There was Christmas holidays and everything. And from straight after that, we started this campaign where we wanted to really explain why conversion therapy bans a problem. And it's a difficult thing to get across to people because, and this is, I think, quite deliberate on the part of the activists, is that when you hear conversion therapy, I think what comes to mind for many people is electric shocks for gay people. You know, it's the kind of first thing that comes to mind. And obviously that's terrible. And nobody would be in favor of that in their right mind. And conversion therapy, that kind of extremely brutal, like physically abusive practices, that is part of the history of gay rights. That is something that did go on even in clinical settings, you know, many years ago.
Yeah. When did they take it out of the DSM as a mental illness? Like,
yeah, I don't know off the top of my head, but it was in the last century, I think.
Not
and
long
that,
ago, yeah.
you know, but these things they did happen. They are part of history. You know, there's the story of Alan Turing, and, you know, people even got lobotomies and things for being gay. So, you know, I think this is the history that comes to people's minds when they hear conversion therapy. And I think this is deliberately used by the activists in order they want people to think of it like that. You know, there's a really interesting thing that when they were talking about this conversion therapy ban and whatever, the country that they hold up as the example for everything is Malta. And there was the Maltese politician there, Helena Dalli, giving her speech.
Okay.
And yeah. And the act in Malta was the first one in 2016. So that's quite early for these bans. But the act in Malta, because of course the law is made at the national level. So these resolutions, maybe that's something we should have said about resolutions, they are not law. They're influential. They can be used by activists, but they're not law. The law is made at the national level. So the law, when it was made in Malta, was not called a conversion therapy ban. It was called the Affirmation of Sexual Orientation, Gender Identity and Gender Expression Act, or something very similar to that. It's all about the affirmation of, and I just think that's very interesting because that is kind of saying the quiet part out loud. That law does what it says on the tin, you know. Mm-hmm. It's about affirmation. It's about making affirmation the only legitimate approach to self-declared gender identity. But since then, all the bans have been called conversion therapy or conversion.
Do you know why I think that might be in the case of Malta? Because Malta is actually extremely socially conservative. They don't like the gays. I mean, on paper, it's a real good example of one of those countries where on paper, it's like South Africa having gays in the constitution when they got their constitution back in the early 2000s or the 90s or whatever. On paper, nickel, like just absolutely spotless. But then in reality, like there's no abortion in Malta. And they were able to introduce all this bananas gender identity stuff. But it came like it was hard to get gay rights in Malta, you know. It's a very religious country. There are probably actually a lot of closeted people in Malta, or there were in the older generation or whatever. So it's, you know, it might have been politically more easier for them to say affirmation of transsexuals, you know, to sell it in that way, because people sort of got over the transsexual thing. They had a VIP a gay transsexual back in the aughts. That was a big public splash because he brought a case to StrasBorg, to the European Court, actually. So anyway, I just wonder if that's the case. But I do know another thing about Malta in relation to conversion therapy that maybe I'll bring in afterwards. But actually, I'll say it now because then I get it out of my system. Sorry to take over for a sec. When you look into the countries where conversion therapy bans have been introduced, have there been any convictions? Malta had Europe's first conviction. Do you know about it? Do you want to tell us? Or should I?
You go ahead. I have heard of it, but yeah, the gay man who talked about his journey to Christianity or whatever.
Yeah. So a guy who worked in ILGA starting in 2008, 2009, 2010 was Sylvan Agius, a real dipshit. He was working for ILGA Europe. He was the guy who was like, he wrote this conversion therapy bans booklet. He started the intersex task force, all this stuff. Maltese, became the assistant to Helena Dalli when she became the Commissioner for Equality. So he might still be in the European Commission, or maybe he's gone back home. I think he's looking to run for a party. Anyway, he was the guy who was behind the gender ID stuff in Malta and the conversion therapy ban. One day, some Maltese gay guy goes on a religious YouTube channel, starts talking about how he found God and he's not having sex with men anymore. The thing goes out on YouTube. Sylvan Agius, the same guy, I have to be really careful here because they're very litigious in Malta. He reports this guy to the authorities for communicating, because in their ban, which is also what they want in all the bans around Europe, is communicating conversion therapy services. So it's not just doing the conversion therapy, but also talking about it in a way that might entice people to want to do it themselves. So he reports these YouTube channel owners, two people, and the gay guy himself, the ex-gay guy who was just talking about his own personal journey and they got fined. They got big fines. They got sanctioned, basically. They got punished. And that was the first big conversion therapy ban success story in all of Europe, which is just bananas. And that guy then, I can't remember, Sivanagis, there's a whole lot of lore about that guy. But he wasn't there, or maybe he was there and you didn't see him, or maybe, I don't know if you noticed as well, there's a lot of Maltese people in the Council of Europe. I think there's a racket going on there. They're all getting jobs for their mates. Sorry, go on, I interrupted.
I'm not sure about, there was certainly a lot of Maltese people commenting in the debate, but that's interesting what you say about the convictions. And I think that sort of relates to what I was saying about the name of the law, that in Spain, we've had a conversion therapy ban as part of the lay trans for getting on for 3 years now. And there have been, as far as I know, no convictions or serious prosecutions. And to me, that suggests that the purpose of the law is not to stop these harmful practices, because if there are these terribly brutal practices going on, then presumably now with this new law, we would be able to stop them and there would be convictions and prosecutions and all of that. So where are they? And that suggests to me that, well, those practices were never happening and the intention was not to stop these practices, but the intention was to create a chilling effect so that affirmation becomes the only possible legitimate response to gender identity. And that is what I always thought was curious about the name of the law in Malta, that it's called the affirmation of sexual orientation, gender identity, and all the others since then you have been called conversion practices or conversion therapy. And that sort of makes me wonder, is that a strategic choice to bring to mind these very brutal practices that once did happen, but I mean, certainly not in a clinical setting. This is the idea that there are electric shocks, but they deliberately bring this to mind because when you look at the text of the resolution right at the beginning, it even has the words electric shocks in it. So it's a deliberate attempt to make you think of the very, very worst brutal practices that nobody in their right mind would be in favor of for anything.
Except extreme untreatable cases of depression, apparently they still used electric shock therapy, isn't it? Or am I referring to a more medieval age?
I mean, if these things, certainly in terms of, changing someone's sexual orientation I don't think anybody...
For sure that's not happening.
Even in favor of that, the most far-right person you could find is not going to be in favor of giving electric shocks to gay teenagers, I'm sure. I don't know. Yeah. But nobody is so basically it's a big straw man. And when you look at the resolution, what is defined as conversion practices is anything that could change the, sexual orientation, gender identity. And the other really important thing is that it's not really about sexual orientation. Like sexual orientation is in there, but it's all about gender identity. That's what it's about, because sexual orientation, we've come a long way. There's gay marriage, there's full civil rights for gay people in the law, and the idea that in a clinical setting there could be some kind of brutal practices or to any kind of practices really to change sexual orientation. I don't think that's something that's really happening, but there's a gender identity is what this is about, So they try to bring to mind these ideas that people have when they hear the words conversion therapy, but what it's really about is making affirmation the only possible response to gender identity, including for children. And not just in a therapeutic setting, but in all the rules, because once that becomes the principle, then that means all the rules in schools, it applies to parents, anything that could. So if effectively schools not affirming a child's self-declared gender identity because their rules say, for example, that boys have to use the boys' toilets regardless of whatever feelings they might have about their gender, then that becomes conversion therapy. And it gets in the way of teachers' safeguarding responsibilities. So the 5-year-old boy who's being trans by his parents, the teacher would, that might be something they would call out as abusive as part of their safeguarding responsibilities, but these rules get in the way of that. So there's lots of, it's much more complicated than simply about what people imagine when they hear it. So that's why Athena Forum did a campaign about it. And what we did is we set up, when we wrote a policy brief explaining all of this in detail about why conversion therapy bans are not what they seem.
Can I ask a question? Can I interrupt? Mm-hmm. Sorry. You launched this campaign, but at that point, we're already at a stage where all of these conservatives and right wings have already seen this resolution and it's passed through committee and nobody has objected or drawn attention to it at all at this point. Is that correct? So it's arrived at the stage it's arrived at where we're going to vote on it. But why do you think it got that?
Well, it was interesting because I talked to one of the guys that was on the committee when I was at the PACE, and he was very honest. He said, look, I'll be honest with you. I mean, I'm very busy with my stuff in my own country. This wasn't a huge priority for me. I didn't attend the meetings. I didn't vote.
And he would have been of what political persuasion, more or less?
Right-wing political persuasion. And he said that is just what happens. I mean, attendance was a huge problem. Attendance in the actual debate and in the vote. But even at the committee stage, they have to meet and discuss these things. And what ends up happening is the ones who are very, very motivated and committed to getting something like this through, then they show up to the meetings and they have their input. And the ones who don't really see it as a priority, and that includes plenty of conservatives, they, allow themselves to do other things. So I think there's, the whole attendance thing is a real problem. It's partly because they're just busy. It's partly because they maybe don't understand the significance of the problem and why this really matters. That's, for us, the challenge of getting that across to them. And also, I suppose there's a kind of degree of strategic avoidance of a difficult issue. And especially with the centre-right conservatives, they're very, very sensitive about being criticised as homophobic or transphobic. And it's understandable to a certain extent. They want to put some distance between themselves and the far right. They're always vulnerable to being called far right anyway, even if they're really sort of centre-right, just ordinary conservatives. And I suppose they look back and they think that they were on the wrong side of gay marriage for a long time. They took a bit of a kicking for that. They're trying to rehabilitate their reputation now, and they're very sensitive about that. And so, one way they can avoid criticism is just not to be there. And we found that at the vote, we were unlucky because in the end, the debate was moved to the Thursday afternoon, which was the very last day of the session, and a lot of...
Was that strategic on the part of the committee or anything, or that?
Well, I don't think they got to choose. I think that was just luck of the draw, as far as I am aware. I don't think that... if they could have chosen, that's what they would have chosen, but I don't think they had any say in that. I think that just... because it kept moving. It got moved around twice because there were various kind of emergency sessions about Ukraine and other stuff came up, so this sort of got shunted off to the end.
On the one hand, it's the cowardliness of saying, fuck, I don't want to be on the hook for saying yes to this. I don't want to be on the hook for this, so I'm going to absent myself. Okay, fine. I can understand that, absolutely. But what I really get upset about is then when you confront them with it, and I'm talking now also about the media, any institution or any parliamentarian or any politician or government ministry or whatever, you confront them with it. So what's their excuse? They're never going to come out and say, right, you know what, I'm just terrified, so I just stayed away. What they say instead is, oh, what? That why does it even matter? And then make you look like the crazy person. And I just want to interject with a little mini rant here. They're all pretending, oh, this is just women's shit, or this is gay shit, this gender shit, oh, we don't care. And for a long time, the women stuff, it's just, the women get put in a little room down the hall at the UN, whatever, and we just ask them to briefly look over our things, before we put them out there in the world. this gender dimension. Yeah, for real. Like you ignored it for years, but now it's literally destroying everything. Like, people want to pretend that we're obsessed with this tiny niche issue that nobody cares about. When you look at how many far-right parties are gaining power around Europe, and because of their own personal cowardice, people will still not look at this issue and wonder, is this contributing? I'm not saying it's the only cause. There's a lot of stuff going on right now, but for their own personal reasons, like personal relationships, whether they have someone in their family identifying as trans, whether they don't want to upset their junior staffers, whether they don't want to upset their junior coalition partners, that'd be political. But there's also a lot of personal stuff going on. They don't want to be seen personally as, homophobic or transphobic or whatever. And the way I see it is, when you talk to normal people, they're not having any of this shit. It's such a huge deal because, and I was saying this on Twitter yesterday, show me someone who cares more about, what happens in Gaza than what happens to their kids in school. Like their kids, vulnerable children. We all know our kids are vulnerable. My kids aren't really that vulnerable. They're fairly mentally stable, but a lot of kids are not. And the parents of those children, they're going into school and they're learning mad shit that is completely objectively bananas. And the parents really care about this. And a lot of us are parents, and we're looking at this and saying, what is going on? Why is everyone lying? Why is everyone pretending it's not happening? And, they're literally, especially they're nutters anyway, all these left-wing parties, but these conservatives, like, there's going to be nothing left to conserve if they don't stop calling it a culture war. If they don't say, okay, well, it is a culture war and it's a very important culture war, and you're just hiding away from it and just not showing up for the vote, or, pretending it's beneath you. Like, this is all we hear anymore. And this sort of pushes people to ignore it harder, because they're like, oh God, don't make me face up to what I've been doing. Anyway, there's rant over.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. There's a lack of courage and a kind of, maybe a lack of honesty. And I spoke to a member of parliament there who was very disappointed in her colleagues who were from her country, but from a different political group. They were in the EPP, and they had gone home rather than face up to it.
EPP, the centre-right, the normie Christian Democrat types.
Yeah, Christian Democrats, Popular Party, so the Spanish.
That was the first part of the conversation. If you would like to hear the rest, you can go to peaked.substack.com to hear more. You do that by taking out a paid subscription, which helps me to continue this work and to quit my day job so I can do more of it. Thank you very much. peaked.substack.com.